in math. As these students quickly learn, incorporating other subjects like math and science into building a vehicle is both challenging and second nature.
Math and science are a big portion of this project. We have to make sure our measurements are so precise and correct, because if we mess up one little thing, it can cause a lot of other things to go wrong. The science portion really kind of comes into my part of it with the solar panel and the electronics and having to know voltage and current and having to know how all of that works.
In a way, it's like you don't even realize you're doing math or science. The first time I started using different tools like a chop saw just to cut the metal and the pieces that we need before we bend them, I wasn't even thinking how I use math to find the measurements I need, make sure I cut it not too short, but it's like, yeah, you don't even realize you're using math or science.
It lets us apply what we've learned in a practical way instead of just being stuck in a classroom.
It allows us as students to prove to others what we do here at the school, in this program itself, how we can use not only our IMO skills that we learn, but incorporate other skills that we use in the classroom as well.
The race is only a week away, and the students are putting the finishing touches on their solar go-kart. They are all confident their design will do well in the competition, but it's the self-satisfaction, teamwork, and skills learned that will be remembered most.
Yeah, I feel like we did a really good job with it.
It's exciting.
I feel like everyone
I
did
won't
a lot
tell
of
you whether they
teamwork,
won or not.
so
You'll have
I
to
feel like
find
we'll
that
do
out
good at the
later.
race.
We've gone into it and knowing nothing and then seeing that now you have this machine that
Okay, so if we go to the next slide, you'll actually see then what standards were incorporated. These are just a few. By no means are they all the things that were a part of this. So these would be the framework, the Arizona standards. But what you were watching is how we implement that through curriculum, through integration, and then through instruction. Because what we know is that the standards do not address all of the skills or the knowledge that our students need. And so in Dysart, we're making certain that we do address those in an integrated fashion. If you go to the next slide, you're going to see what we call the profile of a college and career-ready graduate. Yes, the academics are important, and you heard the students talk about that as the foundation. But if our students are to be successful when they leave Dysart, then they also have to have those critical thinking skills, communication, that tech literacy, that creativity. You saw all of that coming alive in the classroom, and those students then being prepared to move beyond the classroom into the real work experience and or into trade schools and or into colleges. You saw also a collaboration between two schools, that was Shadow Ridge as well as Dysart High School, working together from different pathways that those students have chosen. Again, learning how to communicate, learning how to apply, learning how to use those skills in a way that's real. On the next slide, what you'll see is, again, which student would today's employers hire? There's a student that might be a straight A student, very strong in the academics, math, science, English, social studies. But in today's world, with how fast things are changing in terms of our technology, our science, our engineering, there has to be more than that. So if you look, student B is someone that has mastered all of that content, but also have those work skills. People used to call those soft skills. We don't call them soft skills. We call them work skills. Another really critical one for us is that self-direction. If students give up, aren't persistent in what they're taking on, they're not going to be successful. So that's another one of those critical skills that you can't test in a multiple choice type of test, but you saw the test for those students was taking that solar go-kart and racing that solar go-kart to see whether or not they had really built the best machine. On the next slide, what you're going to see again are some standards. These are standards from Arizona College and Career Readiness. But underneath, it's the curriculum that really defines the roadmap for those standards. Standards are a framework, curriculum is the roadmap. The instruction is, quite frankly, where the rubber meets the road. So if we go to the next, and you hit that, you'll see a little bit about language arts and what does that instruction look like.
Students in Miss Valena's senior English class at Shadow Ridge High School use many critical reading and writing skills on a daily basis. While the teacher guides students through her lessons with both planned questions and follow-up or probing questions, a large part of the learning is done in collaborative groups as students share and question ideas in a respectful manner. During these discussions, students must continually refer back to the written text for evidence to support their opinions. Much of this routine is reflected in the district-adopted protocol of close reading, during which the student returns to the text multiple times for meaning. During the close reading process, students may add to their previous individual annotations or notes, clarify and infer meanings, paraphrase, and summarize. Along the way, teachers at all levels are encouraging students to read and critically analyze more difficult texts to prepare them for the challenges they will encounter in college and careers.
So again, it is about the application of how we make certain that students are certainly headed towards that same end line. But how are we encouraging them to build those skills that they can use when they leave Dysart? We know that 12th grade is not the end of what they'll need in terms of training, whether it's on-job training, whether it's military, whether it's 2-year, 4-year. They're going to have to continue. We need to prepare them for that as well. So here's another look, and in this case, it's how you connect science and literacy. Again, the Common Core really only addresses 2 areas, ELA, English Language Arts, as well as math. But that is not all the standards we're held accountable to. There are Arizona standards for science, for social studies, for the arts, and we believe it is all of those areas that are critical to helping our students to succeed. So again, on one side, you'll see some ELA standards, both our language arts and the writing, and on the other side, what instruction looks like when we develop that curriculum. Okay, so on the next slide, again, our students are going to show you and tell you about that.
The new College and Career Ready standards set requirements by indicating that all students must learn to read, write, speak, listen, and use language effectively in a variety of content areas. The standards call this cross-disciplinary literacy. In essence, it means going across content areas. Subjects are no longer isolated in silos. They intertwine to provide an enriched environment for students to thrive in. In Miss Merrill's class at Rancho Gabriela, connecting science to literacy can be seen in a single lesson and emphasizes the importance of this transition.
Students communicate with each other, they have to provide evidence, they have arguments with each other using that evidence. So they have to record data in their notebooks as they're working now. They have to refer back to that data when they're speaking and in their writing. And with science, we do a lot more writing than we used to.
All of the science investigations in Miss Merrill's classroom start off with a focus question and background information. Then the students are given materials and set off on the experiment without any further instruction from the teacher. Miss Merrill acts as a facilitator for this part of the lesson, and students come up with conclusions on their own. The next step in the lesson for the students is then group discussion. This is a simple 5 to 10 minute piece that aims to reinforce vocabulary and connections before writing.
Having science literacy means that students understand it enough to where they can talk about it. They're using the vocabulary naturally. They're using it as they speak and as they write. And when they come across those words, when they're reading, they understand the context that it's being used in. Group discussion gives them an opportunity to practice using the vocabulary words before they transition into their writing. So if they weren't quite sure of what the words meant, then their discussions with other team members, other group members that did understand it, could help them have a stronger foundation. So when they move on to writing, they can use the words appropriately.
The final task in this lesson is writing clean paragraphs, which makes that final connection from the experiment to the literacy.
So in science we do argumentative writing. If they have a claim that they write down, they have to provide evidence to support that. And that is also something they do when they're speaking and listening standards as well as writing. And it transfers over to reading even, because when authors are writing persuasively, you have to pull out that argument and pull out their reasons. So it's all connected. And then another type of writing we do in science is explanatory. They have to explain the process, explain the topic, explain what observations they had, and they have to make sure that they're writing in a way that other people reading can understand what they wrote.
I think it helps you understand science better because you're taking it step by step, and then it's easier when you first experiment and then you gather all the facts, and then it's easier to gather the facts and then write a paragraph on what your experiment was about.
This process provides engagement for students on multiple levels and allows them to think critically about a topic. They can filter content and seek the deeper meaning, gaining high-quality literacy that broadens their worldviews.
The water covers most of the land and must have pushed down and formed the curves of the Grand Canyon.
They benefit because they get an opportunity to express themselves, to have conversations, to write, to explain their thinking. And I don't think with our previous standards they had an opportunity to explain what their opinions were, what their arguments were. Now they have that opportunity to share their ideas. Our students are growing up in an age where when they go to work, they don't just sit at a desk and do a job. They collaborate, they have to provide evidence and reasons in their job. So if they're practicing with their groups and talking to each other and doing all those collaborations in science, it'll transfer over to the real world. I think that it makes them prepared for college. I think it makes them prepared for their future job.
I think when you learn about it in 3rd grade, it prepares you for 4th grade. Or when you learn about it in 4th grade, it prepares you for what science or something that you're going to have in 5th grade. It's almost like they're teaching you for the future. So they're trying to technically prepare you for what your future is going to be.
That was a 3rd grade class. So we'll stop there because I know my time is limited, but there are some other pieces that, if time permits, we can share as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pletnick. A lot of information there that we had no idea was there. Now it's an opportunity for Dr. Michael to present his views on Common Core.
I need some light. I need some sound.
No, this is in fourth line.
Oh, okay. Am I live? No. I'm not live. Can't hear me.
You want to switch? Oh, the microphone.
I have to eat the microphone. Is that correct? Okay. Well, I think that the superintendent and I have slightly different perspectives. We're going to be speaking past each other a bit. She gave you a local perspective of what's going on in her school district. I will take a different view. You will think I'm living in a different world, probably. Here's the question that we were asked to debate tonight. Resolved, well, you can see what it is. I'm opposed to that. Let's go on to the next slide. Discussions. All of you have heard people talk about Common Core. You've heard them debate things such as, is Common Core constitutional? Does it violate federal standards? Was it developed by grassroots educators? And all the rest, the list that you see here. I'm going to suggest to you that a very strong case can be made that each one of these statements is false if you had to do a true or false. This runs contrary to what Common Core advocates say, but then that's the reason that I'm here. I want to move tonight to talk about or against Common Core for another far more basic or foundational level that we'll see on the next slide here. At the top, what we have here is my rendition of a iceberg. At the top we see just Common Core standards for English language, arts, and literacy in history, social studies, science, and technical studies, which is the full title for what's usually referred to as English language arts. Notice they want to include literacy in these other subject areas. This has profound impact that we will talk about. Below the line here, the water line, what is below that? What you see is Common Core, I've written, is just one eruption, perhaps the most recent one, of the progressive cancer that is metastasizing throughout education and throughout our entire political body. The goal of this cancer is to fundamentally transform the United States of America. Okay, we can have the lights. We'll stay on this one for a while, but I need some light. Let there be light. All of you have an opening statement that I put together. If you're like me, you write something and then you look around and you see what other people have written and you think, golly, there's this piece over here that's so much better than what I wrote. And that happened to me this time too. I have one paragraph here I want to read to you. You don't have this paragraph. I'll tell you where to find it if you like. It summarizes everything that I had planned to say, and we will go into that in a little bit more detail, but I want to read this one paragraph. There is an organization known as the National Association of Scholars, NAS. It's a professional organization of university scholars, as the name implies. Peter Wood is the president. He will release in approximately 60 days a report to veterans. Oh, wait a minute, what is this? An academic guy in a university setting releasing a report to veterans about education? I wonder what that's about. Let's read what he writes here as a preview. The purpose of this report is, and I quote, to alert veterans that the liberty and principles they fought for is being expunged from school curricula everywhere in America. We are alarmed that American exceptionalism is no longer taught. We are deeply concerned that the NAEP, that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress, only considers 12% of high school students proficient in history. Only 12%. Now you know what's happened? That result is so bad and it's been consistent that the NAEP said, hey, we're tired of getting beat up over that. So let's use a sequester as an excuse and eliminate the test. And that's what they've done. So I went and looked up their figures. What's the budget of the Department of Education? What does it cost to give the NAEP test for these two grade levels for which it's being eliminated? It is 1/100th of 1% of the Department of Education's budget. Sequester doesn't fly. Most of all, we are concerned that students are being instructed that America is the source of much trouble and oppression in the world and not a beacon of liberty and justice. If the next generation accepts this teaching, then there will be little reason for them to support and defend America or the Constitution. The ramifications of this eventuality are frightening to contemplate, and we can already see that happening today. We believe that veterans have paid a great price so America can remain the land of liberty. We believe they should have a voice in reforming education, and so should you. This is the most important component of Common Core and education. This is far more important than anything we've seen so far. Let's turn to the opening statement here that I have. The daunting task that's in front of all of us here tonight is to mend and to restore the tattered fabric of our nation that is being torn apart at the hands of transformationalists. Call them what you will, progressives, liberals, leftists, collectivists, statists, socialists, communists, whatever. Their goal is the same, to get rid of the America of the Declaration and the Constitution. That's what's going on in education. That's what has to be stopped. Not just get rid of Common Core. That's only the latest iteration. Well, it's fun to write a piece like this. You can take a look at this. The bold face right here at the first page says, make no mistake. To use the phrasing of President Obama, Common Core is a program intended to fundamentally transform the United States of America. That is, to promote the leftist agenda that is hurtling down the tracks towards totalitarianism. Remember de Tocqueville, 1835, Democracy in America. Even then, he was saying in 1835, our monarchs today, modern monarchs in 1835, unlike those old monarchs, despots who imposed tyranny through physical methods, our modern enlightened despots have made tyranny entirely a matter of the mind. If you can get the students to vote for their own enslavement by first of all teaching them that socialism, communism is better than capitalism, you've achieved that despotism that you're looking for. Pew poll from 2012, it's referenced in here someplace, reports that 18 to 24-year-olds have a much more favorable view of socialism than of capitalism. Is big education accomplishing your goal? Well, I go on to say some other things at the bottom, that if you doubt any of this, consider these things down at the bottom. Why is the IRS trying to shut down groups like this one? Why are they trying to implement voter ID? And so on and so forth. Let's go on to page number 2. Here again, make no mistake. What's under attack is Western civilization, Christianity, and liberty. If you study history, what you will find, and this statement comes from Robert Pletnick, who is the architect of the Hamilton Center for the Study of Western Civilization, a historian of 33 years. There is no other source of liberty, no other source for that idea of individual liberty than Western civilization. And what's the foundation of Western civilization? Christianity. How many Islamic regimes do you know of that have liberty and representative democracy?
0.
How many communist regimes? How many socialist regimes? Look at Europe. Is the EU membership elected? No. This is the only place where it happens. Dropping down several paragraphs. The progressive theology that I refer to leads inevitably to the conclusion that only by eradicating freedom can the perfect society imposed by force, because nobody wants to do what they want, redistribution, it's not going to happen voluntarily. So it has to be brought into existence by force or through tyranny of the mind, through getting kids to believe somehow, shaping their attitudes and their beliefs to believe that socialism is better, that there is an elite group, as Andrew Covella in his piece in American Spectator points out, the ruling class. They know better than we. They know what's best for us. And so their ideas should dominate. We don't count. Okay, so that gives you a little hint of what the problem is that we're concerned about. The country's going down the tubes. The education establishment is greasing the skids. It is due to this progressivism. Point number 2 on page 2. That used to be only primarily in the universities. I worked behind enemy lines there for quite a few years, and I'm well aware of what goes on. But now, this progressive cancer has metastasized into K-12 education, and if I don't talk too long here, or if I talk fast enough, I'll be able to show you that it's in Common Core itself. Next page. Here are a list of 8 items, 8 reports that show you that you can go look up and read, and this will tell you what this progressive cancer is like. The first one, losing America's memory. We got to get rid of these ideas of the American founding and the American exceptionalism and all those high ideals. The second one, the stealth curriculum, manipulating America's history teachers, and on and on. Let's go down to number 6, New College Board U.S. History Takeover. You've heard of the AP, the Advanced Placement Tests, or courses I should say, for a variety of subjects, including American history. Well, it's been revised to be aligned with Common Core. This particular piece, if you go look up the reference, you'll find it, I think it's a 7-part critique of what's in the AP history or Miss History. Let's look at number 8. This is one we'll spend a little time on. It's a report on the National Council of Social Studies National Convention held in Atlanta in 2009. Mary Grabar is an English professor. She is an immigrant to this country from a communist Yugoslavia. She knows what she's talking about. Her report of this particular, what she saw at this particular convention, is called Indoctrination Without Apology. Social study teachers share strategies on how to mold students. Next page. We won't have time to go through these, but we will take 1 or 2 of each. What is the mold? Students are being groomed to become global citizens.
Yes.
That's the code word for anti-Americanism, committed to social justice. Social justice, code word for communism, socialism. Islam is presented positively in all the sessions there. Christianity is degraded. Students are taught sympathy for illegal aliens. Instructional methods. Avoid what they refer to as Euro thinking. Linear and logical methods on which Western civilization is erected. Instead, use methods associated with Native American traditions. Avoid reflective activities. Don't write something and think about it. Instead, use group work, puppets, songs, quick responses to emotional prompts. Avoid writing. Next, the major speakers. I'll only mention the first one here. The keynote speaker at this National Convention of Social Studies was Eric Foner, communist apologist. Now, he's a well-known professor of history, holds the distinction of having served as president at 3 major historical associations. But that's an indication of where the academy is. Well, what's missing from this convention? Look under there. Not a single session. She went through all this, did a content analysis. Not a single session prompted a positive view of America. Not one session offered a positive view of Western civilization. Patriotism, never mentioned. Christianity, not presented positively, and on and on. Let's go to point number 4 here, and the next slide if we have that, which is from college indoctrination to Common Core. What I want to talk about here is, in Mesa, Arizona, is the Heritage Academy. Kara Palmer is a American history teacher there. She took, let's go to one more slide. She took this document right here, which is Appendix B, text exemplars for Common Core, curriculum for Common Core, recommended, and sample for performance test. She did a content analysis. There are 333 titles there. She found that 77 of them are on American history topics and taught in those American history classes. So she said, I'm going to break these down to categories. What did she find? You'll see on table 1 on some page there of the handout that she found that 40% of the 77 so-called history items concentrate on racism, slavery, discrimination. All very bad, in a very bad way. America is terrible. We're the cause of all the trouble in the world. We're a racist, sexist, homophobic society. Don't you know? So, I broke that down further according to grade levels, and what you'll find is listed under point 4 under the table that in the first grade, all exposure to kindergarten and grade 1 students is to a racial text. And then by 4th and 5th grade, I believe it's up to 63%, and on and on. What kind of impression are students going to get about America when this is the kind of exposure they get, which is recommended by Common Core standards? Look at point number 5. She asked this question. When it comes to the Common Core standards in American history, are the texts chosen and placed in such a way that might turn and shift students' emotions and perspective of America towards a social agenda starting in kindergarten? Yes. Well, what's going to be the outcome of this kind of education? We're going to see it. This is what we get. Starting with nice little students on the right. Notice, on the right, they go to school. The skies are sunny. Life is good. We go to school. We come out being little Obamas. Doesn't look so good anymore, does it? Let's go to the next slide and see what else we get. Product of this education system. At the bottom here, questions and topics are some that during the question and answer period you may wish to ask.
Our format includes having the opportunity for each of our speakers to comment or question on what the other has presented. So Dr. Pletnick, if you'd like, Dr. Michael, if you'd like.
Could you possibly pull mine back up? While we do that, what I would invite you to do is to go to Dysart's website, and you will see on there a video library. And I just want to read to you a few of the videos that you would find. This is just one school. It's Marley Park. And they have a 9/11 show that was live streamed throughout our entire district. We have that ability, if one school is doing something, to live stream. And this was, again, remembering 9/11 and the sacrifices that were made. You will also find Veterans Day celebrations. What we do is invite speakers, our veterans, into our schools, and they share information. And in fact, our students were a really important part of a fundraising effort to put the first Veterans commemorative project into Surprise. There's no other area where veterans are commemorated. There will be now in Marley Park. It was our veterans community, and with support from our students, raising money for those bricks then that will lay out and honor those folks that have served. In fact, there's going to be one for my father. I had to make a choice. My father and my husband, both veterans. My father won. The other one that you will see up there is Fire Department, City of New York. And again, celebrating the sacrifices those first responders make for us. And the list can go on and on and on. But again, we don't have the time, but you can go onto our website and see what's happening in the Dysart Unified School District. Those are the facts. And some of these go back 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. The other thing I'd like to just share briefly, if you can go to the slide that says Pathways. These are just some good statistics. It's towards the end, I promise. I'm going to ask you just to share one. Whoop. Sorry. I'm going to ask you just to click this one, please. These are the kinds of programs that we have at Dysart.
The Army Junior ROTC program was established by the National Defense Act way back in 1916 as a way to provide citizenship training and leadership development for students in the public school system. At Dysart High School, that vision is never more prevalent, as 156 strong are currently enrolled in the Signature program, learning values such as character, teamwork, and service to others.
We also tried to get the Air Force program as well, but it's very limited. It's very hard to get because we already have the Army. They would not allow us to also have the Air Force program. We were going to offer that at Valley Vista. This one is at DHS, but open to any of our students. So again, just sharing with you the types of things that are happening in Dysart.
Yeah. What's that got to do with Common Core?
All of our classes must be aligned to the framework that we're given by the state. So the Common Core standards, regardless of any of the pieces that you just saw, are actually then that framework is what has to be used. And so when we write in curriculum, it has to reference back to that area of the standards that we had adopted. So whether it be the reading or the writing pieces, but again, we get to develop the curriculum. We get to develop the actual instruction. We get to choose our own resources because in Arizona, unlike some states, in some states, whether it's Texas or some of the others, they're mandated. California, Texas, a few others. In Arizona, we're not mandated to use the same textbooks across the state, nor are we mandated to use any specific piece. So in Dysart, we choose the materials and those pathways that we actually use for instruction.
Let's give the superintendent a hand for supporting veterans. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
What was the reason?
Would you hold on?
Wait.
What was the reason for bringing Common Core into the school district in the first place? Why did they do it? Did they have to do it?
Yeah.
Did they balance the state budget on the money that was required from the government to take care of this? Why did we sell the children's education short?
I think both of us will respond to that. Go ahead.
In the beginning, this was not about the federal government. These were standards that were being developed, trying to bring again together some of the people doing the work. And there are practitioners. We had one at Dysart. He is a university professor at U of A in the math area. They, again, working collaboratively to try to develop these. I will tell you that one of the concerns that happened is it used to be that schools received federal funding through things like ESEA, which was to help, that was authorized under Johnson, that was to help students that were coming from low SES families that had some extra challenges. The federal government then started moving to competitive grants, like Race to the Top. When they moved to competitive grants, unfortunately, along with that came a lot of red tape. If you wanted those competitive grants, you were signing off on things. Arizona was one of the states that went after a competitive grant, did not get that money, but still had signed off on those agreements. And so part of what we're seeing is related to the fact that, is there money tied to it? You'll hear there's not. There is, except we never really got that money because as a state we never won a Race to the Top grant. So part of all of this process, the fact that now we're using those singleton assessments for teacher evaluation, principal evaluation, for graduations, for all sorts, it's become very high stakes. Those are related. You can't say that those aren't related to this. My biggest concern, quite frankly, with what's happening right now is that we're moving forward with new assessments. In this state, they have not yet, they've just put what's called an RFP out, and that tells you which people are going to basically offer this kind of service, and then you get to select from it. The Ames test is already gone for this state. It was taken out. It's not a bad thing, but there isn't anything yet that has been put in place. Next spring, the concern that many of us have is that this new assessment will be implemented, and as with anything new, I choose never to buy the first year model of a car, a washing machine, and anything, because chances are there are going to be some issues that have to be worked out. My concern is that we're moving down this track that is going to be implemented. If we use it for high stakes, then we are going to be judging students, teachers, schools on one assessment. You saw in Dysart that we are really trying to have those authentic ways to measure whether students are being successful. So when students are building a car, does the car work? That to me is an authentic assessment. When students are writing, are they able to communicate their thoughts and convey what's most important? That's an authentic assessment. So there are many ways we can assess students. We get tied up with one way, and then we're mandated to use that one thing to measure everything in the world. It's like anything else. If you have diabetes, you take a blood test. That isn't how you tell your temperature. That's not how you tell whether or not your blood pressure is high. That it's one indicator. And unfortunately, in education, oftentimes we get stuck with one thing and don't allow ourselves to use those other things. So is there a connection? There is, because some of that money that was tied to that assessment piece was tied back to these competitive grants that used to not be competitive, but were part of a process to provide, again, supports for the most needy children in our society.
Where did Common Core come from? We have to go back further than any of you will want to go, I'm sure, which we want to go back all the way to Pletnick. The roots are there in fuzzy math. Jump up to around the late 1980s, the National Council of Teachers of English, and so on and so forth. There is a entity of organizations known as Beltway Bandits. Achieve Incorporated is one of those. I am sorry to report to you that when I finished my coursework in graduate school, I went to work for a Beltway band. I only stayed 1 year though. What these organizations do is that they exist on the basis of federal funding, state funding, and corporate grants largely. They keep their eye out for requests for proposals. When people float those about, they make applications to get federal funding to do something. Achieve in 2004 was working hard on coming up with a set of standards. David Coleman and a couple of other people were the ones who were involved in writing the English language arts standards. David Coleman is on a film that you can go look at on YouTube that says, we were a group of unqualified people to do this, but nonetheless they were paid to do it. Now, how did these standards get into the schools? Well, the standards were floating around. Back in 95, there was a push to implement national history standards that went down in flames. The Senate voted against that. I think it was 99-0, if I recall correctly. People who want national standards get that lever in there, the federal government, to control the minds of everyone, learned that they can't go after that. So they went after something more innocuous, math and English language arts. How did they do that? They knew they couldn't do a frontal assault. That was too obvious. They aligned with two trade organizations, the chief state, the chief whatever it is, CCSSO, State School Officers, and NAG, National Association of Governors, provided the fig leaf of cover for the Mark Tuckers, the Bill Gates, the Hunt Foundation, and all these other people who want national standards. Now, the statement is usually made that Common Core standards are state-led, grassroots. The federal government had nothing to do with it. Do you believe that? No. Well, it's one thing to believe something, but it's another thing to have some evidence, is it not? Right here I have, for the year 2010, IRS Form 990, which is the form that nonprofits turn in. Okay, if we look at this, we'll find that 80% of the National Association of Governors funding came from tax dollars. If you go back to 2004, the first year for which we can find them, it was even higher. And every year between 2004 and the latest year, at least half of the money for this state-led, pure as the wind-driven snow, National Governors Association, and CCSO, there's a huge amount of federal dollars going in there. You telling me that has no effect? Most of those are grant dollars, of course, for particular projects. If you want to get the two views of what's going on, you can go to the Common Core website itself. Here's a list. It's called Myths versus Facts. Be very careful. I was taken back when I looked at this. I thought that the person who put this together mixed up what's a fact and what's a myth. It seems to me they should be the other way around in most instances. Okay, so how did it get into the school? We had a recession. You remember the stimulus funds available for shovel-ready jobs. 4.3, or maybe it was 4.5 billion dollars were skimmed off, sent to the schools, not actually sent to the schools, but made available for this race to the top kind of funding. If you want to find out how this really works, you go to the Arizona State Board of Education website. You look up their archived minute meetings for 2009 and 2010 when this was going on. You see how much discussion they had about the evidence for Common Core before they adopted it. Any guesses?
No.
You're right. You're right. Now, the testing. Robert Lynn is one of the big names in the area of assessment. He's been around for years. I thought he was an old man when I was a graduate student. And he's still writing. He and another colleague have turned out a piece saying, if history is any indicator, what you will find is that tests drive curricula. And that's true. If you go back to January 17th, 2013, to the Arizona House Education Committee meeting, you will find the then Executive Director of the Arizona State School Board, Vince Yancey, stating, our goal is to have 3 PARCC tests embedded as the final exam in English classes and 3 math tests embedded as the final exams in math classes. Think of that. You're an English teacher or you're a math teacher. You no longer get to write your final exam. Do you think that you're going to teach what you will think students should learn or what PARCC is going to have on it?
That's right.
Where did the money come from to develop the PARCC tests? Of that 4.whatever billion, 325,000 were taken off. The federal government gave them to establish the PARCC consortium and the other consortium called Smarter Balanced. Now, what you have to realize is that the ideas that underlie what I refer to as the progressive cancer, these ideas are held by all of these people who are, most of these people, there could be a person like me still working there, they are held by most of the people who are developing these tests. There's another big thing going on that's sort of related to technology. For years we've used what's called classical test theory, but now the big thing is item response theory, which requires computers, data banks, large numbers of students taking tests. People who are interested in this kind of thing haven't had that access. They see a gold mine here to finally test out some of their theories about IRT. And so they want to develop tests that are based on this. Not that it has any real advantage other than you can make a test a bit shorter and still have reliability and validity. But that's the only real advantage of IRT, even though other advantages have been advocated. But we can go to the literature and find studies that show that no real difference exists. Talking about evidence, well, maybe I should stop here.
I get a question because I got the mic.
Okay.
After you.
I have two questions. The first one is very practical. I am a grandmother. I have 8
Hold it
children.
close to your mouth.
I have 8 children in the Dysart School District. If I walked into a board meeting or onto campus, would I have access to the curriculum?
Yes, in fact, you can get it online right now. So if you go to the dysart.org website and you look up IPAL. IPAL stands for I Plan, I Assess, I Learn. The one piece that's open to anyone is I Plan. That's the curriculum. So
What is not open?
the I Assess, because that's student scores and that sort of thing. So that's the way we handle that. As a parent, you can get your own student scores through the grade book, but that's why that one's closed. And the I Learn is actually our professional development. So the only reason you can see what we offer for professional development, the only reason we don't leave it open is we couldn't have parents signing up or other people signing up for our professional development classes. It's a catalog of professional development.
The second question that I had is with respect to the item response testing. Is Dysart planning on using computers to assess their students in the future?
In fact, on some of our assessments, but not, there isn't a state assessment yet. So that's the million-dollar question for everyone. So if it's a mandated assessment by the state, we wouldn't have an option, but to do the mandated. Parents have an option to opt their students out in some states. But again, we haven't adopted an assessment in this state yet, so I don't know what that's going to look like. Can't speak to it. Do we use computers even now for benchmark assessments and things of that nature? Yes, our students work online all the time. And that isn't, to me, that is not an issue or a problem. In fact, it's a good skill. My son is a doctor, an anesthesiologist. In order for him to make it through each of the levels, he was actually being assessed online. So it is a good skill. Do I think it's the only skill? Absolutely not. You can't really evaluate a student's writing unless they're really writing. So would I use that for that? No. So to answer your question, if we're mandated to do it, we'll have to find a way to do it. Here's the problem. The big question that many of the schools have, including Dysart, and we're known as a district that really has been using technology effectively for a while, we don't know that we have the capacity at this point in time. In this state, they cut back on capital a couple of years ago, so there aren't many school districts that have been able to buy the technology that would be needed in order to administer this. Remember, we have almost 26,000 students in that district. That's a lot of technology.
Will the dissemination of that test data be available outside of FERPA? In other words, the privacy rights of our children, will it be disseminated to third parties?
We, as a district, do not disseminate any information. That information, however, remember, even the Ames assessments, we give the Ames assessments, we pack them in boxes, we ship them out. That analysis of that in terms of each student comes back to us. We don't have control over the grading of it, the gathering of that. So in our district, we do not disseminate that information. We are not the only people that have that information. The state has it as well.
Got it. Thank you.
I have a question. In Dysart, you talk about Common Core as a framework. How much flexibility do you have? Let's say that you and your organization decide our kids aren't learning enough about the Constitution. We want to teach them more about the Constitution. Can you do that? How can you do it?
At this point, we can do it because it is a framework. And we were giving the Ames test, which isn't aligned to the Common Core to begin with. So why we were using that test is, over the last few years is certainly another area of concern. But absolutely, if there is testing and if we are held accountable to that testing and if parents and the community believe that an A on that labeling system we have, which is based on a test that you give one time in the school year, really defines an educational system, then obviously that's going to impact what happens in those classrooms.
It goes along with her question. When you said the whole
curriculum is available on the computer, on the internet. If you looked, could you tell every assigned book in literature for every grade level? Would the teacher list every book by title, by author, and so forth? And if the answer to that is true, is she able or he able to bring in a book that isn't on that list and say, oh, I just want you all to read this book in addition?
No. So yes, it is available. We have a board-adopted reading list. What can also happen, though, so no group kinds of materials can be brought in unless it's been vetted, and there is actually it's an Arizona statute where we have to put any materials that we're going to adopt for group use out for the community to look at and comment on, and that's a 6-week process, and we always advertise it in the newspaper, on our websites. We just did a math adoption. Then it comes back, and all of that is analyzed, and then a selection of materials is determined by a committee. Then it goes to the board for approval. What students can do is certainly go to the library, select a book that they want to read and bring in. So can students utilize other materials? They certainly can if they're doing a book report or something and they're self-selecting out of the library. That's different. But if you're talking about whole class sets, no, it has to go through an approval process.
Excuse me, do we have a question or a comment directed to Dr. Michael? Microphone?
Right here. Right there.
Dr. Michaels, is there a test being developed to replace the SAT test for Common Core?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. David Coleman, who I mentioned before, who is or was the chief architect of Common Core English Language Arts Standards, moved over to, what is the organization? The College Board that publishes the SAT. He promised when he did that, I'm going to align the SAT with Common Core. That has now happened. What it means is he's throwing a lifeline to Common Core. It is explicitly dumbed down. It is not the test that you may have taken years ago.
I had a question. We, for hundreds of years, had the freedom in each state, for each state to set its own standards, and within the state, each school district could pretty much decide what it wanted to do. Now, I taught for basically 35 years, over a span of 35 years, and at the beginning of my teaching, teachers were allowed to walk in and teach what they pretty much wanted to, as long as it followed the text and you were a qualified person. My question is, why do we think relinquishing our freedom and our responsibility to do the best we can for our students is best served by letting the government mandate a Common Core of standards that may not even be close to what they were in some of the better states? We need the best.
When I looked at the things that were being offered in the schools, it all looks great, teaching them how to build solar cars and so forth. But I graduated in 1972, and our classes did the same things. They taught the same basic ideas, the ideals, and when we graduated, that's the kind of things that we had to do too. We had to know how to read, write, math, science, history, a full spectrum. I don't see where Common Core improves on that. Now, I know that down through the years, the schools have lost a lot of money, especially since this administration and the recession. Many of the schools got closed. Many of the schools have had to drop major programs like music and shop class and all these other things. Bringing this into Common Core doesn't make them better than what they were before. In fact, it just kind of replaces what we used to do. So my question is, these government standards that are supposed to be across the board for every single state, so that if a student is in 9th grade in New York and happens to move to Arizona, they pick up exactly where they left off because of the way the curriculum is written. How is this an improvement? And if Arizona is doing very well with having its own local standards now, where does that leave us in the future?
You've said so many things there, I can't possibly respond to them all. But first, let me, I'm not on, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Has anyone in the Dysart School, have any of the students submitted essays to, say, the Concord Review, which is a publication specifically geared to accept college-level work from high school students on the analysis of historical or literary kinds of work? This would be a great exercise for a student in addition to building a solar car.
We actually have students who, right now we have one who has a $60,000 scholarship for his work that he did. We have another accepted into culinary arts, full ride. We have several that have scored perfect on assessments that come through the Explore. We have a number. We have a student who in 9th grade won an architectural a competition and started being offered full ride scholarships from around the country, from places that wanted to utilize him. We have a student right now in our architectural program who they are actually an architect, was so impressed with her work, they're building the house, and she gets to tape it and follow it as they build her design, and she is a high school student. So we truly, when I say award-winning, our list goes on and on and on across the board in all areas. So whether you're talking about in those job areas, whether you're talking about in the areas of math, our goal is, again, to have every student have opportunities.
But that was always
Opportunities and options so that they can
that was the
continue
standard
on.
back in the 70s.
This is really great. I'm sure that much of what those students accomplished, and I'm glad to hear that, is attributable to their parents, the values that they inculcated in those students. I want to say something about standards. These common, the standard line is Common Core standards are better than virtually all state standards. I have slides here. I can show you that for both math and English, there are 14 or so, don't bother, I want to talk fast, the slides will go. There are 14 or so states that have standards that are higher or just as good as Common Core. There's nothing magical about Common Core. Second, what about this tacit assumption that's put forth and never examined that somehow standards, the quality of standards, is causal and will cause students to perform better? You think that's true? No. Have you seen any studies to demonstrate that? The answer is no. So what I did, I went to the Fordham Institute website where they rated the standards for all 50 states and Common Core. I went to NCS, National Center for Educational Statistics, downloaded all the NAEP scores for the states for the years 2009, 11, 13. I correlated the Fordham rating of the standards in both math and English with performance. In math and English, is there any relationship, any correlation? This is not causal now, but any relationship between quality of standards and student performance? The answer is no. Why hasn't anyone published this yet? Secondly, in math, I did the same thing. Here I found a relationship that could not be attributed to chance variation. There is a relationship between the standards in the state and student performance. The relationship is inverse, a negative sign, which means states that have standards least like Common Core have students that perform better. Why isn't this published?
My question has not really been answered yet, and that was, why would the mandatory things from the federal government be better than letting the 50 states do their own thing and each one publish it and then go ahead and each one that would be emulating the ones that were successful?
Well, first you have to get rid of the Department of Education.
Right.
Yeah. with all due respect to Dr. Pletnick, I feel that you are really in a position of having to defend Common Core. My daughter is a teacher, not in this state, but they are certainly, absolutely teaching to the testing. She says she is no longer in charge of her class, basically. She is giving rote information to children out of a book that she doesn't necessarily approve of. However, if she complains about it, she loses her job. One of my biggest fears, and that I've seen this on YouTube many times and on some news channels, are parents that are going to the district meetings and complaining about the materials that are being used in school. And some of them are very sexually explicit, starting in kindergarten. And I have great fears of this. I mean, can't we learn on our own about those types of things? Which I think is something that certainly, should be done. My biggest the question is, certainly this is mandated education coming from the government, which you have to follow as an educator and an administrator, but I don't see where it's, when you get to, I guess my biggest question is, when you get to the nitty-gritty of what's actually being taught to our children, not the way it's being taught, but what is being taught, is the crucial issue here. And I don't believe that it's the standards that we grew up with, learning our reading, writing, and arithmetic, and everything we could possibly learn about the history of our country and the world. So I guess what I'm concerned about is what this gentleman also said was, they had the choices. You no longer have choices. You have to do what the government tells you to do. And that's a very scary proposition, and I'd like to know how you personally feel about that.
And I can tell you in Arizona, because they do not mandate textbooks, they do not mandate curriculum, just the structure. I know there are states where absolutely you are handed your material, and that is what you teach. That is not the case in Arizona. Do I have concerns about the direction we're going with the assessment, that then, is there a link in our schools? And we really do make certain, when we're talking about not only content, but those other skill sets, we are adamant about those being a critical part, and have had the support of our parents. We didn't come up with those work skills. That was a group of people from our community that sat with us, and from businesses, and we looked at what are those pieces. So anything that we've been doing, we're doing with input from our community. Therefore, we have the support. If, again, there are assessments put in place, I've expressed that I have grave concerns about how they will be utilized.
Let's ask the question, what is progressivism's impact on reading content? One book that you might want to look at is called The Story Killers. It's written by Terrence Moore, a history professor at Hillsdale College. He points out all the problems with these exemplars that I pointed to earlier, the 333 list of recommended or exemplary texts. There are also other books that you've heard about, like The Bluest Eye, Dreaming in Cuban, I believe is the title of another one, that have no place in college, or in, well, maybe not even in college, but certainly not in high school. There are other books that other researchers who have been concerned, like Paul Vince, a psychology professor who examined 670 stories from using grades 1 through 6, and did a content analysis and found very disturbing information. Mel and Norma Gabler down in Texas, he's passed away, I'm not sure if she has or not. They have examined textbooks for many years, and they have a book out called What Are They Teaching Our Children? You should get a copy of that. You should get a copy of Paul Vince's book, and there are others that express these same concerns. Part of the progressive agenda is to have immoral people. Only moral people are fit for our Constitution. You heard John Adams say that, right? Yeah. So if we can't get it on a frontal attack, let's corrupt the morals of the youth.
Just on the side.
Oh, wait a minute, the microphone directs.
One more question.
No, the microphone directs.
Dr. Pletnick, you've done an admirable job telling us about Dysart Unified School District. What's your personal opinion about Common Core?
But let me offer her some defense first. She may not be in a position where she can really tell you that.
Are there any reporters in the room? If so, leave. Turn the camera off.
And so I'm going to be very honest. The Common Core Arizona standards are not my biggest concern. It's the implementing of assessments that really then could take away that freedom, that ability for us to build our curriculum, make sure that we're putting in place some of those other skill sets, that self-direction, that critical thinking, all of those pieces, being able to utilize the materials that we believe best meet the needs of all of our students. Do I believe those things then can be impacted when you're using measures that are basically evaluating everything in your system based on that one measure? That's a great concern to me.
I will be very, very, very brief.
This is a problem that we absolutely have to address. And one of the best ways to address it is, would you please give $5 to Diane Douglas? She is running for Superintendent of Public Instruction. And Dr. Michael, do you know another way that we could get rid of, a better way to fight this right here and now other than getting Diane on the ballot? Thank you.
We need her on the ballot. We need a superintendent of public instruction who is not wedded to the siren song of Common Core.
Okay, we're approaching those of time. I'd like to extend the thanks to Dr. Pletnick and Dr. Michael. It's been an extremely informative session.
I think I speak for both of us when I say you guys are the ones who are the winners tonight.